Um, Welcome, everyone. It is so good to have you here. And I do not want to see myself. I like gallery view. There we go. I like to see everybody. And this evening, we are so lucky to have two excellent tellers. We have Pat Peterson leading us off, and we have Larry Hohm. No, I've got it mixed up. We have Larry leading us off, and then Pat, and then Larry again. I apologize. I asked Larry the other day how he got into storytelling, and it was a long story. But what he said was that he started out in life, his first career was in teaching philosophy. Well, it seems like he's come full circle because in telling stories, we really are experiencing philosophy of a different kind, the understanding of our listeners and our tellers. So Larry loves to tell spooky stories. He tells literary stories, and he told me that he really enjoys after dinner sitting down with a good murder. He enjoys a good murder after his dinner. And Larry's stories will send a chill up your spine. Larry, please take us away to the land of spookiness.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, and thank you all for coming to listen and for helping us to keep this storytelling tradition alive. I'm going to start us off with three rather short stories, all of them written by Roald Dahl, one of my favorite authors. Starting with, it's a bedtime story, really, that you could tell your children or grandchildren, if you so choose. The Crocodile. No animal is half as vile as Crocky Walk, the crocodile. On Saturdays, he likes to crunch 6 juicy children for his lunch, and he especially enjoys 3 of each, 3 girls, 3 boys. He smears the boys to make them hot with mustard from the mustard pot. But mustard doesn't go with girls. It tastes all wrong with frills and curls. With them, what goes extremely well is butterscotch and caramel. Oh, what a super marvelous treat when girls are hot, when boys are hot, and girls are sweet. At least that's Crocky's point of view. He ought to know. He's had a few. That's all for now. It's time for bed. Lie down and rest your sleepy head. Shh! What is that I hear? Galumphing softly up the stair? Go lock the door and fetch my gun. Go on, child, hurry, quickly run. No, wait, stand back. He's coming in. Oh, look, that greasy greenish skin, the sharp white teeth, the greedy smile. It's Crocky Walk the crocodile. That was Roald Dahl. And to continue in that vein, this next story is one of his adaptations of a classic fairy tale. Little Red Riding Hood and the Wolf. As soon as Wolf began to feel that he would like a decent meal, he went and knocked on Grandma's door. When Grandma opened it, she saw the sharp white teeth, the horrid grin, and Wolfie said, "May I come in?" Poor Grandmama was terrified. "He's going to eat me up," she cried. And she was absolutely right. He ate her up in one big bite. But Grandmama was small and tough, And Wolfie wailed, "That's not enough. I haven't yet begun to feel that I have had a decent meal." He ran around the kitchen yelping, "I've got to have a second helping." Then added, with a frightful leer, "I'm therefore going to stay right here till little Miss Red Riding Hood comes home from walking in the wood." He quickly put on Grandma's clothes. Of course, he hadn't eaten those. He dressed himself in coat and hat. He put on shoes, and after that he even brushed and curled his hair. Then sat himself in Grandma's chair. In came the little girl in red. She stopped. She stared, and then she said, "What great big ears you have, Grandma." "All the better to hear you with," replied the wolf. "What great big eyes you have, Grandma," said Little Red Riding Hood. "All the better to see you with," replied the wolf. He sat there watching her and smiled. He thought, "I'm going to eat this child. Compared with her old grandmamma, she's going to taste like caviar." Then Little Red Riding Hood said, "But Grandma, what a lovely great big furry coat you've got on." "That's wrong," cried Wolf. "Have you forgot to tell me what big teeth I've got?" "Oh, well, no matter what you say, I'm going to eat you anyway." The small girl smiles. One eyelid flickers. She whips a pistol from her knickers. She aims it at the creature's head, and bang, 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 she shoots him dead. A short while later, in the wood, I came across Miss Riding Hood. But what a change! No coat of red, no silly hood upon her head. She said, "Hello, and please do note my lovely furry wolfskin coat." And we'll do, thank you. We'll do one more of Roald Dahl's adaptations of another classic fairy tale. The Three Little Pigs. The animal I really dig above all others is the pig. Pigs are noble. Pigs are clever. Pigs are courteous. However, now and then, to break this rule, one meets a pig who is a fool. What, for example, would you say if, strolling through the woods one day, right in front of you, you saw a pig who'd built his house of straw? The wolf, who saw it, licked his lips and said, "That pig has had his chips. Little pig, let me come in." No, by the hairs on my chinny chin chin." "Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in." The little pig began to pray, but Wolfie blew his house away. Wolf cried, "Bacon, pork, and ham, oh, what a lucky wolf I am." And though he ate the pig quite fast, he carefully saved the tail till last. Wolf wandered on, a trifle bloated. Surprise, surprise, for soon he noted another little house for pigs. And this one had been built of twigs. Little pig, let me come in." No, by the hairs on my chinny chin chin." "Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in." The wolf said, "Okay, here we go." He then began to blow and blow. The little pig began to squeal. He cried, "Oh, wolf, you've had one meal. Why can't we talk and make a deal?" The wolf replied, "Not on your Nelly." And soon the pig was in his belly. "Two juicy little pigs," Wolf cried, "but still I'm not quite satisfied. I know how much my tummy's bulging, but oh, how I adore indulging. So, creeping quietly as a mouse, the wolf approached another house, a house which also had inside a little piggy trying to hide. "You won't get me," the piggy cried. "I'll blow you down," the wolf replied. "You'll need," said Pig, "a lot of puff, and I don't think you've got enough." Wolf huffed and puffed and blew. The house stayed up as good as new. "If I can't blow it down," Wolf said, "I'll have to blow it up instead. I'll come back in the dead of night and blow it up with dynamite." Pig cried, "You brute! I might have known." Then, picking up the telephone, he dialed as quickly as he could the number of Red Riding Hood. "Hello," she said. "Who's calling?" "Who? Oh, hello, Piggy. How are you?" Pig cried, "I need your help, Miss Hood. Oh, help me, please. Do you think you could?" "I'll try," she said. "Of course I'll try. What's on your mind?" "A wolf," Pig cried. "I know you've dealt with wolves before, and now I've got one at my door." "My darling Pig," she said, "my sweet, that's something really up my street. I've just begun to wash my hair, but when it's dry, I'll be right there." A short while later, through the wood, came striding brave Miss Riding Hood. The wolf stood there, his eyes ablaze, and yellowish like mayonnaise. His teeth were sharp, his gums were raw, and spit was dripping from his jaw. Once more the maiden's eyelid flickers. She draws the pistol from her knickers. Once more she hits the vital spot and kills him with a single shot. Pig, peeking through a window, stood and yelled, "Well done, Miss Riding Hood!" "Ah, Piglet, you should never trust young ladies from the upper crust. For now, Miss Riding Hood," one notes, "not only has 2 wolfskin coats, but when she goes from place to place, she has a pigskin traveling case." Thank you. And now we are going to hear from the delightful Pat Peterson.
I am going to introduce Miss Pat to you all, if I can figure out my, let's see, wait a minute, here it is, gallery view. All right. So I would like to say a few words. Well, first I would like to thank Barry for some wonderful stories. And you see, it's all about one's philosophy of life. What makes suitable dining is certainly included in any study of philosophy. I want to introduce Pat to you. If you all don't know her already, you definitely should. I first heard Pat at the Forest Storytelling Festival in Port Angeles, and she was a wonderful MC there, and I've heard her MC in other storytelling venues, and I love Pat's sense of humor. Pat told me that her sources for stories are books and the internet and her own experiences with people and life in general, places she's been. And she was really hoping that tonight Barry wouldn't scare her too much. And she seems to be bearing up comfortably here. So I guess, Larry, you didn't scare her too much, but you made us all laugh. So let me, with great delight, introduce you to Pat Peterson. Thank you, Pat.
Oh, thank you, Anne. You know, let me just say this about Larry. He hasn't scared me too badly yet, but I have a feeling with him, there's always a little something waiting in the wings behind the curtain. When I think of Larry telling, I sort of think of a wonderful library filled with leather-bound books, a crackling fire, leather easy chairs, just class all the way. And yeah, that's the kind of teller that he is. Well, many of you know, I have commented in the past that I grew up on radio. And when I was in school, and perhaps actually should have been in school if I was home ill, I would listen to soap operas during the day. On weekends, I would listen to my children's programs and after school as well. But on Saturday night, it was the mysteries, the shadow, suspense, gangbusters. I loved all of those programs. I could see them in my mind. And sometimes they stayed with me long after the radio was turned off to trouble my sleep a bit. But I could never get enough of them. And that continued on. However, there was another side to my endeavors, and that was at the local library. When I was 6 years old, my father took me to get my library card, and every week I would go. Now, I loved fairy tales, all kinds of them, and folk tales, but I was particularly drawn to those with what I call the creep factor, and I'd like to share one of those with you tonight. There was once a woodman who lived all by himself in a wonderful little cottage that he had built with his own hands. He lived there quite comfortably, cooking what he needed and making his own clothes. And every day he would take his axe and go deep into the woods and cut wood, and eventually he would take it into town to sell. Well, on this one particular evening when he was cleaning his axe, he noticed that it was really quite worn, and he would have to go into town and buy a new one. Well, that was okay. He was lonely living out there all by himself. And so the next morning he got up and he combed his gray hair and he put a pin into his jacket where he'd lost a button, and he picked up his axe and he went into town looking for a new one like the old. Well, the people in the town were so glad to see him. He was well liked. And so he visited and ate a meal with people. Oh, it was wonderful. And you know how it is sometimes when you're having an awfully good time, you just kind of forget about the fact that the day was ending. And so he picked up his new axe and said goodbye and that he needed to get home. And some of the townspeople said, you know, it's really almost dark. And why don't you spend the night with one of us? Don't go home. You know, it's Halloween, and witches and goblins will be out. And the old man said, it's not dark yet. It's just twilight. And I'll be home well before midnight, and I'll be perfectly fine. And so off he went. Now, he knew those woods like the back of his hands. And as he went, though, things seemed different. The path he always took seemed narrower, and branches were reaching out and grabbing at him and hitting him in the face, and he was tripping over roots, and the path seemed to get narrower and narrower. And then all of a sudden he came to a birch tree that was so wide he couldn't get around it. And so he stopped and looked, and there in the middle of that tree, there were 6 great big eggs. And he said, oh, look at that. Those are huge eggs. If I had those and they hatched into great big chickens, I'd never have to worry about breakfast or dinner again. And so he very carefully picked them up, along with his axe, and carried them back to his cottage. And when he got there, he looked at them and thought, well, I need to keep them warm. And so he remembered he had a big piece of red flannel that he was going to use to make himself some winter shirts. And he got a scissors and cut it into squares and very carefully wrapped up each of those eggs and set it down right by the fire. And for 3 weeks, he did nothing but tend to that fire and turn those eggs carefully from one side to the other, day and night. It's all he did. And then finally, one morning, he began to hear something in the eggs. He heard a chipping sound. And pretty soon, out through the top of one of the eggs, there came not a chicken's head, but a purple arm reaching up. Oh, he said, oh, it's not a chicken. And then one of the other eggs cracked, and out came a purple leg, and another, and a purple head. And they all cracked open. And what the old man had were goblins. Oh, they looked so horrible and scary, but they were so little, crawling around on the floor. And the old man said, oh, they look so cold. And so he took those flannel squares he had wrapped the eggs in and cut a hole in each and slipped it over their heads, and it seemed to warm them somewhat. And he said, how shall I feed them? Well, he went and got some pans of milk, but the goblins didn't seem to know how to drink out of that. So he took some of that flannel and dunked it in the milk and then dripped it into their mouths. And oh, they liked that. They liked that a lot. And soon they learned to drink out of the pans. They learned to drink so well that they drank too much. They ate all the time. And as a result, they made quite a mess in the old man's cottage, and he was so busy taking care of the goblins and cleaning up after them. It's all he did day and night. Oh, it was so much work. And one day he thought about leaving them and going away and getting some peace and quiet, but he knew if he did, they would starve to death. And that old man had a very kind heart. And so he said, well, if I take care of them, and maybe when they're older, they will take care of me. Now, that was a very nice idea, but it didn't work out that way. As those goblins got older, turns out they were not going to be caregivers. They were taking all the time. They were greedy. And they were mean. They pulled the cat's tail. They hid the old man's glasses. They pulled his hair. It was awful, day and night, day and night. But the old man noticed one thing that was a little unusual. In the evening, when it began to get dark, and the old man would light a candle and put it on the table, the goblins would stop whatever mischief they were into, and they would gather around the table, put their elbows on the table, their chins on their hands, and stare at the candlelight. And as they stared, their eyes got big and round. They did not wink. They did not blink. They just stared at the light, which was fine until the next day. Well, it continued like that for some time, and the old man, frankly, was just getting exhausted. And then one night, he had an idea. After dinner, when the goblins were all sitting around the table, looking at the candle, with their eyes big and round, not winking, not blinking, the old man took the candle and put it into a lantern. And he picked it up and began carrying it through the woods. Now, as he carried it, the goblins were coming along behind him. And you know, these were the woods that old man knew so well, except for that night. He had a hard time finding his way back to the beech tree. He stumbled over roots and branches, scratched his face, and he fell down, and it felt as though something was grabbing him by his belt and pulling him back, and he managed to pull away and move forward some, and then he saw the beech tree, and he took the lantern and he put it on one of the branches, and all of the goblins gathered right underneath, and they looked at it with their eyes big and round. They did not wink, they did not blink. And the old man thought, at last. And he began to walk away. But he found himself compelled to look back over his shoulder at that light and those goblins sitting there. And as he watched, he began moving back towards the tree and found himself sitting there with all those goblins. And there they were, with their eyes big and round, looking. They did not wink, they did not blink. Now, if you were to wander into those woods, perhaps on a Halloween night, not that I'd encourage it, but should you might find not 6, but 7 goblins sitting under that tree, looking at the light with their eyes big and round. They do not wink, they do not blink. There are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy, Horatio. Good old Shakespeare, Macbeth. How lovely Macbeth, particularly at this time of year with witches and ghosts wandering those castle ramparts. I had somebody ask me once if I believed in ghosts, and I said, I don't know. I have never seen a human ghost, so I couldn't really say. I will tell you that when I was camping in Tennessee after attending the festival at Davy Crockett Birthplace State Park on the banks of the Nolichucky River one night in my little pup tent, the wind was blowing, the trees were whipping back and forth, and I had been asleep, and then I woke up because I would have sworn I heard hoofbeats running along the bank of the river. And I'm thinking, this isn't one of those bring your horse in kind of campgrounds. This is just people and RVs and tents campgrounds. But it sounded just like hoofbeats, and they ran up and down and back and forth. I did not open the tent flap and look out. The next morning, I asked the ranger, I said, is there a horse running loose in the campground? And he gave me one of those side looks and said, no, ma'am. I said, I could have sworn I heard hoofbeats. He said, well, you're not the only person who said that. There's some that think on certain nights Davy's spirit just gets a little restless. So he rides up and down because it was the place where he was born, and he feels quite comfortable here. I don't know. Never have seen a human ghost. Didn't see a horse ghost either. But For years, we had a wonderful black and white tuxedo cat named Bumpus. And as happens with animals we love, and as they age, he left us. Never was a cat quite like Bumpus. One night, I was coming back from a storytelling event up here in Port Angeles. It was twilight, and I got out of the car and was walking towards the house, and I looked up to the second-story window in the studio, and I swear I saw that cat sitting there, looking right at me. So I went in the house, and I thought, I'm not saying anything to Richard, the long-suffering, about seeing the ghost of Bumpus on the second floor of the studio. But after a few days, I just couldn't contain myself anymore. And I said, Richard, when I came home from the swap the other night, I looked up and I swear Bumpus was sitting in that window looking right at me. And he said, huh, Richard the physicist, Richard the pilot, Richard the scientist, a lover of all things factual, turned to me and said, well, I'm sure as hell glad I'm not the only one who's seen him. I hope he'll come back. When we leave Port Angeles, after we sell this house, I really hope Bumpus will come along with us. Now, when my grandmother would go to the beauty parlor, she'd take me along, and I'd sit there and wait until she was through, and then we'd go have lunch someplace nice. I didn't like beauty parlors. The smells made my nose wrinkle, and there was always just a lot of noise, but it was worth it to be with my grandmother. So it was one day I'm sitting there waiting, and one of the beauticians handed me a comic book, and that was fine. I read it. And then I didn't have anything else right there. And then I looked underneath, and on one of the shelves under the table, I saw a couple of magazines I'd never seen before. So I picked them up. True Romance and Modern Detective. Well, I'd never seen these magazines before. And the first thing I noticed when I opened them up, that the paper wasn't all slick and shiny like the Ladies' Home Journal or Red Book magazine. The paper was a little rough and kind of yellowish, really. And then there were lots of pictures. Now, the romance one really didn't interest me, but the True Detective, there were photographs in there, black and white, of murder scenes. And oh my, I took my time looking at that. Perhaps that planted a seed in me for a lover of true crime novels. There was a time when I read a lot of true crime novels. It turns out that Anne Rule wrote for those detective magazines. And I had one of her books with me on a trip that I took to California to the Sierra Storytelling Festival. I was by myself camping, and I was staying at a very primitive kind of a campground. It had a vault toilet, and you got your water by pumping it. And the thing that I loved the best about it is it was very quiet. When I came in early in the morning, there wasn't anybody else there. So I found a great place up on a hill and was reading and enjoying myself and anticipating the wonderful stories I was going to hear. And I noticed a white box truck pull in down below. Oh, I thought, well, that's nice. It wouldn't be bad to have a little company. And what side door slid open, and a man got out, and he took out some shovels and some buckets and a pickaxe. And then he spread out some papers on a picnic table. It looked like Looked like maps maybe I could see. Huh. But nobody else got out of the box truck. Oh, well, I thought, that's okay. So late in the afternoon, I took a jug and went down to pump water. It was kind of hard, and I'm priming that handle up and down and up and down, and all of a sudden behind me I heard, "Would you like a little help?" And I turned around, and here was this man standing there. I said, no, I've got this, thanks. He said, "You here all alone?" And I said, "Yes." And then I said, "But my husband is going to be joining me very shortly," which would have been quite a trick considering he was in Seattle. He said, "Oh, well, let me know if you need any help." He said, "Are you here for any particular reason?" I said, "Oh, yeah, I'm going to a storytelling festival, the Sierra Festival." He said, "Oh." He said, "Well, I come up here every single year. I'm a dentist, and I go panning for gold in the Yuba River, and I take the gold back and I sell it, and I use the proceeds to help some of my patients who don't have much, and I think it's a good trade." And I began to relax, and I think it must have looked visible on my face, and he kind of smiled, and he said, "Are you okay?" I said, "Oh, I'm fine." And I was there for about 3 days, didn't see him much. On the day before I left, he showed me some of the gold that he had managed to get in a pan, and he was ready to take it back to Oakland. And that was the last time I read true crime novels. I decided I needed to move on to something a little bit different. There was a woman who had no family left. She was of an age, but she lived quite happily by herself. But after she retired, she decided she wanted a little company, and so she got herself a little white dog. Oh, she loved that dog. They went everywhere together. Now, the only thing that the woman decided was that dog could not sleep on her bed. But he could sleep right next to her bed on a little throw rug she had there, specially for him. And he liked that well enough. But in the wintertime, when it got cold and the floor would be cold, he would go into the living room and sleep in front of the fire where the embers were nice and warm. But usually he was right there, right next to the bed. And if she ever had a bad dream or a nightmare, she'd just put her hand down over the bed, and that little dog would lick her hand, and she always felt so comforted by it. Well, one night she was reading that day's newspaper in bed, and she became very troubled because there was a story about a bad man who had escaped from prison, and he was in prison because he had evidently murdered about 5 elderly women who had lived all alone. And the old woman felt very anxious, but she put her hand down over the side of the bed and felt the licking, and oh, that comforted her so much. And then she heard a snapping and a crackle from the fire in the living room, and she thought, "Oh, I hope nothing pops out a spark on the rug." And she turned to look, and there, sitting in front of the fire, was her little white dog, wagging its tail, and something was licking her hand. I was on my way back from the National Festival in Tennessee some years ago. Needed to take my rental car back to Knoxville and catch a flight to Seattle. I'd had a wonderful time. And as I was going along, I thought, I better stop and get some snacks to take with me on the plane and gas up the car before I turn it in. And here was one of those great roadside, what I call them, gas and go places. In fact, there was a sign that said, "Eat here and get gas." And so I pulled in, filled up the tank, and then I went into the store. Well, I found myself, when I came in, right by that, the warmer with the rollers with the hot dogs. Those hot dogs had been traveling those rollers for a long time. And I thought, I sure don't want to take one of those on a long airplane back from Knoxville to Seattle. So I bought some packaged snacks. I thought that would be safer. And I was just getting ready to go up to the cash register when I saw a wire rack, one of those spinner racks, And there was a sign on the top in cardboard printed with looked like a Crayola that said "Youth Books." Well, now I had books from the festival I was taking back with me, but I find myself, it's very hard for me to bypass books. And so I just gave the spinner a little whirl, and one of them caught my eye. And for 25 cents, I had a book with a story in it that has been with me ever since. It was a night most dark and dreary. And Maggie Flynn was standing on the front stoop of her apartment house. In her hand, she had a thin leather leash with an empty collar dangling on the end. And she's looking up and down the street calling, "Tommy, oh, Tommy, won't you please come home? It's late. It's time we were home." And above her, in the second floor windows, were the O'Malley sisters. Now, you might know some people like this. It made it their business to keep track of everybody going in and out of the apartment and making comments about how they lived their lives. And they had plenty of comments about Maggie Flynn. "Do you see her? Look at that thin coat she's wearing. She shouldn't be out at all. It's so cold. And it's dark. She's after that smelly old cat. I told her, let the cat go out during the day. And if you have to have a collar on him, have it be tight so he can't slip it when you take him out for walks." And what does she say in her addle-headed way of hers? "Oh, I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that. Poor Tommy, he might jump up and catch it on a picket on a fence and strangle himself. I couldn't abide that." Well, I told her, I said, all of the stranglings that have been going on in the last few months, and you worry about that cat. Oh, but will she listen? Might as well be talking to a stone wall. Now, I'm only looking out for her welfare. And the other day, I'm in the market, and just out of a neighborly way, I happen to look into her basket to see what she has there. Well, she's got a tin of salmon. That would be for Tommy. And a little bottle of cream. You know who that's for. And for herself, some day-old bread and vegetables that have seen better times, to be sure. But nothing's too good for that cat. But will she listen? Not at all. Well, Maggie knew that they were doing, sitting up there talking, but she didn't care. She and Tommy, they had a good life together. And what she wanted him was home now. She had the tea kettle on the back of the stove and a saucer of milk warming and the chicken already in a nice plate warming there on the stove. She'd been so careful to get the bones out of that chicken because a cat can choke on a chicken bone, You got to be careful. Well, she thought, I'd better go looking for him. He's such a naughty boy, but I love him so. And so holding the leash and the collar, she stepped down to the street. And she looked up and down. Oh, it was so dark. She thought maybe he'd gone down to the docks because the fishermen were due to come in, and they liked Tommy. She knew he went down there, even though she shouldn't have. He'd come home smelling a bit fishy, and she knew where he'd been, and they loved him so they'd toast him a bit of fish or scraps. And so she decided she'd go down to see if she could find him there. And as she went, passing by alleys, she'd call to him and call to him, but there was no meowing sound back, nothing but the sound of the wind, and nobody was out and about. And as she was passing this one alley, she thought she heard something, and she looked up, but it wasn't Tommy. It was a great figure of a man so large he seemed to block out all of the light from the street lamp. And she said, "Excuse me, sir, have you seen a black and white cat? His name is Tommy, and I can't seem to find him tonight." And the man looked down at her and said, "You're out with all that's been going around, looking for a ratty old cat? You ought to be home. You shouldn't be out on a night like tonight." You remind me of my mother. Oh, she had a cat. It was an orange cat, and all it did was lick itself in the most disgusting way and shed all over our apartment. I had fur on my clothes, on the chairs. It was awful. Well, one night I took that cat for a walk, and that cat did not come back. My mother was upset. She carried on so I couldn't stand it anymore. So I put her in a place where she could be looked after, and I could have the apartment. That suits me just fine. And you had better go home before somebody puts you in a place where you can be looked after. And he turned and walked away. Maggie had to stand on tiptoe to flip that leash up and over the man's head and pull it tight around his throat. She had amazing strength in her hands for a woman of her age and size, and she was patient. It was always the element of surprise that did them in. And she waited until he finally slumped down to those slimy cobblestones and was still. And then she unwrapped the leash from around his neck, and she reached into his pocket and took out his wallet. Oh, quite a bit of money, which she carefully tucked up into her glove, and then carefully replaced the wallet into his coat pocket. "That's only the proper thing to do," she said, "so someone could notify the authorities and perhaps his mother, who now maybe could move back into that old apartment and get a cat or as many as she liked." And just then she heard brrr from down the alley, and there he came, frisking about as though he was a kitten again, her Tommy. "Oh," she said, "you wicked kitty, you gave me such a fright." She reached down, put that collar around his neck, picked him up, and held him close. "Oh, Tommy, we are going to be fine for quite a while now. I suppose some people think what we do is wicked, but I really can't help it. It's the high price of cat food." From ghosties and ghoulies and long-legged beasties, dear Lord, protect us. Thank you.
Oh, Pat, thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh, my word. Oh. What a lovely bunch of stories you have entertained us with, Pat. Thank you. Oh my. And you said that you like to tell stories about about people and places and life events, and here I thought they were real life events. Oh my. And we return again with Larry Hohm. Larry, give us another story so we can continue this wonderful evening.
First, I have to say, yikes. Pat is a hard act to follow, but I'll give it a shot. I must say that I feel now that it really is, it's time for the scariest story ever told. I'm serious. I have no doubt that the story you are about to hear will be the scariest story ever told. I say that because that's the title of the story. The Scariest Story Ever Told, written by Colin Nissen. It was published in the New Yorker in 2015. At the end of a quiet road, behind a veil of twisted black oak trees, there was a house. A woman lived there. On bitter cold nights like this one, she sat by the fire and read until she grew tired enough for sleep. But on this night, as her eyes grew heavy, she was startled by a sound she was not accustomed to hearing these days. Who could be calling, she wondered, and this late? She rose from her chair and picked up the phone. "Hello." "I'm going to kill you," said a man with a deep voice. "Who is this?" No answer. "Who is this?" she repeated, her hand trembling. There was a click and then silence. The woman quickly dialed the police and explained what had happened. The officer told her to wait while he traced the call. A moment later, he said, "The call is coming from inside your house." "That doesn't make sense. How could someone be inside my house?" The officer answered, "He probably broke in." "Oh, yeah, that does make sense." He continued, "That's not all. I'm not really a police officer." "You're not?" "No, I'm the killer guy from before. I never actually hung up." "But I heard a click." The man on the phone made a clicking sound with his tongue. "Like that?" he asked. The woman said, "Wow, that's really good." The man on the phone said, "Thanks." The woman asked, "So, are you really inside my house?" "Yeah, totally." "Where?" The man's breathing grew heavier. "I like your hair." "Wait, you can see me?" "Yes." "Wait. You like my hair?" "It's very nice." "If you could see me, then what am I wearing?" The man on the phone replied, "Looks like a blouse from Banana Republic and a skirt from Ann Taylor Loft." "Wow, you really can see me." "That's not all. I can also see..." "Wait, what the hell is that?" "What?" "There's a ghost hovering near you." "It's sort of hard to trust you after that click thing." "No, I'm serious. Over by the couch." The woman turned and gasped, "Oh my God, I see it. I knew this place was haunted." The man on the phone said, "Ooh, holy cow, is it a kid?" "Ew, he's all translucent." The woman said, "Looks like a little boy." The man on the phone said, "What does he want?" The woman answered, "I think he wants to play. He's holding a kite." The ghost boy floated closer and said, "Play with me." The man on the phone said, "Oh my God, he can talk." The ghost boy repeated, "Play with me." The man on the phone said, "No, thank you." The woman said, "He can't hear you. Put me on speaker." The woman said, "Hold on. Try now." The man on the phone said, "We do not want to play with you. Okay, Junior, just run along." The ghost boy cocked his head to one side and said, "Why? Playing is fun." "No, it's not," said the man on the phone. The ghost boy turned toward the woman. "Who are you? And why are you in my house?" The woman answered, "Oh, I'm Ellen. I actually live here now." And the voice you're hearing over the phone is, then speaking into the phone, she said, "I didn't get your name." Reluctantly, the man on the phone said, "It's, Douglas." Ellen explained, "Douglas is hiding somewhere in here to kill me." "Right, Douglas?" "That was the plan." The ghost boy said, "Wow, and you guys are afraid of a kid with a kite?" "A dead kid with a kite," said Douglas. There was a heavy silence for several moments. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Douglas said, "Expecting someone?" It rang again. Ellen walked over and opened the door. Standing there was a hulking man in ratty clothes, barely hiding a bloodied machete behind his back. "Pardon me, ma'am, my car broke down, and I was wondering if I could recharge my phone in your house." Ellen said, "Sorry, I don't think so," and started to close the door. The man shoved his foot inside and said, "Well, I do think so." Ellen stumbled and fell to the floor. Douglas screamed, "Who the hell is that?" "I'm a homicidal drifter," said the drifter. "Who the hell are you? And where's that voice coming from?" Ellen explained, "He's a killer hiding in my house." Then holding up the phone, she said, "His name is Douglas." The drifter looked around nervously. "Hiding? Where?" The ghost boy said, "He's in the closet." The drifter said, "What the hell is that?" The ghost boy answered, "I'm a ghost. I used to live here like 100 years ago. Do you want to play with me?" The drifter said, "Hell no, I don't want to play with you. What's going on in here?" The ghost boy yelled, "What's going on is no one will play with me." Douglas shouted, "Look, kiddo, no one wants to fly a kite at night, so give it up." The ghost boy began to cry. Ellen chided, "Now you've made him cry, Douglas." Douglas said, "Sorry if I'm a little on edge because you let a killer into the house." Ellen retorted, "First of all, I didn't let him in. He barged in." The drifter said, "It's true, I did." Ellen continued, "Second of all, you're a killer too, Douglas." The drifter said, "Touché." Ellen added, "Third of all, don't say sorry to me. Say sorry to the dead kid." Douglas sighed. Okay. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have snapped at you." The ghost boy smiled, and everyone seemed to relax a bit until the doorbell rang again. Ellen walked toward the door. In unison, the other three shouted, "Don't!" Ellen opened the door. She peered outside, but there was no one there, just a large wooden box on the front step. Ellen said, "There's a box out here with no label or anything." The drifter said, "I've got a bad feeling about this box. Ellen carried it inside, set it down, then turned to the drifter. May I? The drifter wiped his machete on his pants and handed it to Ellen. She popped open the top of the box, reached in, and pulled out a tattered clown doll with a sinister grin. What is it? Shouted Douglas over the phone. Ellen answered. It's a tattered clown doll with a sinister grin. The ghost boy whined. I don't want to play with a clown doll. The drifter said, why don't we just put this thing back in the box before it gives us all nightmares, okay? Ellen said, look, there's a string, and she began to pull the string before anyone could object. The clown began to wheeze. Its eyes shifted from side to side. And an eerily cheerful song emanated from its open mouth. Welcome to my circus of fun. There's no place to hide. There's no place to run. You're all my guests inside the big top. I'm going to kill you all, basically. The clown let out a terrible cackle. Douglas said, I'm really psyched you pulled the string, Ellen. I mean, come on. The ghost boy asked, what did the clown mean? The drifter answered, I think it was pretty clear. He's going to kill us all, basically. Ellen asked, how is a doll going to kill us? Each of them silently surveyed the room in anticipation. Suddenly, the lights went out. The ghost voice yelled, what happened? Who did that? The drifter said, I can't see a thing. It's too dark. Through the darkness, Ellen let out a cry. Oh, no! Douglas screamed, Ellen, what is it? The drifter said, with his voice shaking, it's the clown. It must have killed Ellen. And we're next. The ghost boy sobbed. He killed Ellen? Seconds later, the lights flickered back on. Ellen was still very much alive, and she raised her hands to her face. Was that another doorbell? No, couldn't have been. She raised her hands to her face and said, my stupid contact lens slid out of place. And she spread her eyelids apart and she poked at her pupil. It's so annoying. The drifter squirmed. Oh, please don't do that. Douglas asked with dread in his voice. What's she doing? The ghost boy was wincing as he answered. She's touching her actual eyeball with her actual finger. Ellen maneuvered her finger deeper into her eye and explained, it's a real slippery one. I can't get a grip on it. Douglas gagged. Oh my God, that is so vile. The drifter raised his fist to his mouth with a grimace as Ellen pressed her thumb against her wet, quivering eyeball for leverage. Ugh! Now I think it's folded up under my eyelid. Then stretching out her eyelid, she said, can someone look and tell me if they can see it? There was a click from the phone. Ellen said, Douglas? Was that a real click? The ghost boy faded into the wall, saying, I'm out of here. Ghost boy? Said Ellen. Then she heard the front door opening behind her. Drifter, you too? The drifter turned toward her with a dazed look. I hate this place. Then he dropped the machete from his limp hand and walked into the darkness. Thank you.
Oh, wow. That was the scariest story I ever heard, Larry.
Well, you're welcome to switch to gallery view and let Pat and Larry know how much you appreciated their sweet, smiley stories tonight.
Perfect stories for an October night. Thank you, Pat, and thank you, Larry.